Yes, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this morning's meeting of November's meeting of the County Council Executive. Welcome, everybody, and I'll enjoy your deliberations throughout the day. So, first of all, Rachel, can we have apologies for absence?
Yes, we can have apologies from Councillor Mrs Bradwell, Councillor Boothroyd and Councillor Davey. We also have apologies from Andy Gutherson, Executive Director of Place, and Chris Miller, Head of Environment, is here representing in his place.
Thank you. Any further apologies? Good. Item 2 then, declarations of council's interest. Are there any set declarations? None indicated, so we call they were on done. Moving to item 3 then, announcements by myself or any of the executive councillors or directors. Just obviously we have been out the government's budget came out last week. In terms was quite a transformational budget in many ways. So in terms of the county council, I'll let Andrew fill in the blanks. But basically, from our perspective, there is extra money. We are a public sector organisation, so we have been exempted from the national insurance increase, although not within the base budget, which means it's only a 1-year settlement as far as we know at this stage. So there is lots of details as well, and one of the major concerns we have is obviously our suppliers, including those in the social care sector, are exempt from the increase in social care, and that, if it's not addressed, will result in a substantial extra bill to the county council as those extra costs are moved on. And if Councillor Davey was here, I'm sure he would be saying they also have a concern that the extra costs imposed on businesses, particularly small businesses, in terms of the increase in the minimum wage, the national insurance contributions, extra protections for employment and extra environmental costs which will be put on to businesses is going to be quite substantial. And I think from economic development, we do have a concern that the changes in the national budget could have a very detrimental effect on businesses, but also on the economic health of the country. And the other item, of course, which is causing headlines and will affect Lincolnshire, of course, being agricultural policy, is the proposed changes to inheritance tax, in addition to all the other changes which businesses have, but in particular to the farming sector. It does seem to disproportionately have a damaging effect on small farms, family farms, and if it's not changed, there will be almost certainly fewer and fewer family farms in Lincolnshire who have been the sort of the bedrock of rural life for generations. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, it was just to add a few more, bit more context to the numbers that we're reading. So yeah, the government announced an additional £1.3 billion of funding for local government next year. Typically, you'd expect to normally receive about 1% of that, so maybe the order of about £2 million. Albeit the government have said that they will be starting to bring in a targeted approach to funding, particularly focused on deprivation. So we need to start to understand what that means. We've received a letter from the Deputy Prime Minister to say that there'll be a local government finance policy statement delivered to us at some point during November, which will start to help us understand that a bit more. There were some other announcements around an additional £500 million or new £500 million for highways money, and we're starting to work through the implications of what the extended producer responsibility in waste means as well, because there was £1 million funding announced for that too. So as you say at the start of your street leading, quite a sizable change of budget. So we're starting to work through the implications of that. Not least trying to coordinate the numbers around the impact on our contractors, in particular around the national insurance changes, which are quite sizable. So more on that as we proceed through the autumn.
And we're talking about millions, aren't they? So just on the adult care.
Yeah.
£5 to £6 million.
Yeah, absolutely. But we're working through the detail of that. So
the settlement, because we won't know our individual settlement.
19th of December, we've been told.
19th
of December, just before Christmas.
And obviously, indeed, with the highways, we don't get details of that too. So we'll know in the round where we sit. Okay. Any further? Yes, Councillor Corey.
Thank you, Leader. I want to, we all know that announcement was made over the weekend that the Steampunk Festival, Ministry of Steampunk, is staying in Lincoln next year. So I want to publicly thank the officers for the months of hard work that they put into supporting the organisers of the Steampunk Weekend, which will take place at Lincoln Castle. I particularly want to mention the Chief Executive who gave support, and also to Councillor Brockway, who did a lot of work supporting and guidance Ministry of Steampunk, particularly in their search for someone to fulfil their accommodation needs. So I want to say publicly thank you.
I gather there's a lot of work that council had to do to get this
Yes.
over the line. It is important for Lincoln, but
Yeah.
do what we can.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any further announcements? Nope, not seeing any, so thank you very much for that. So we then move on to item 4, which is the minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of October. Is it your wish I sign these as a true and accurate record? That agreed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll do so after the meeting. So then we move on to the first substantive item, which is approval to secure a contract for bulk haulage of residual waste.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. It's just the procurement's up for the haulage for the waste. Been going for 7 years now. There's not much change in terms of what we're asking from that sort of exercise. I think the main thing is the price it'll be priced on a per load as opposed to price per ton, which has been before. And some of the routes previously have gone through some of the villages, so we're going to try and make them, if it's feasible, to go use the main routes instead. But if Rachel wants to add any more.
Yes, thank you, Linda. In terms of the contract itself, I'll kind of go through each of the steps and pick up on Councillor McNally's points. As you said, it's relating to the bulk haulage of the residual waste material coming from the waste transfer stations to the current disposal facility, primarily the energy from waste at North. We have a statutory duty as the disposal authority for the Environment Act to dispose of that waste material. Currently, the residual waste is increasing year on year, and the volumes are still expected to increase even with the removal of the food waste and soft plastics, which are expected to be collected separately during the new contract life and as a result of the changes in the simpler recycling legislation. Current contract expires on the 31st of March 2025, and the current supplier is Bulk Freight Limited. We are using an open competitive tender route as there are limited suppliers in the market who specialise in the haulage of residual waste and operate within Lincolnshire. Many of those suppliers are smaller suppliers, but they have indicated at pre-market engagement they'd be able to fulfil the contract with a relatively short mobilisation period required of around 3 to 5 months. As stated, the contract length is proposed as 5 years with 2 further 12-month options to extend up to a maximum of 7 years. And during the pre-market engagement, that longer term contract was preferred by all suppliers. The payment mechanism will include indexation on the mileage element on a monthly basis, which will ensure that mileage costs are reflective of any fuel prices, reducing the likelihood of suppliers building in additional risk into their price and taking account fluctuation of fuel prices. Quality end element of the tender process will focus on how bidders will ensure service delivery targets are met, along with the operational management of staff and vehicles and any business continuity arrangements. Suppliers did express concern during pre-market engagement regarding delays to turnaround times occasionally at the energy from waste facility, and this is being addressed through the contract with our suppliers there and realistic turnaround times being included within this contract. We'll be managing performance throughout the contract with service credits applied when it does fall below the targeted levels. As Councillor McNally said, this will include adherence to collection plans and routes. With regard to routes, taking feedback received during the life cycle of the current contract, the specification reflects the need for potential suppliers to use principal A roads where possible, and all routes will be agreed ahead of contract commencement. We'll, of course, need to exercise flexibility in exceptional circumstances, e.g. roadworks and road closures, that the performance measures have been developed to ensure that the waste transfer stations stay within their permitted capacity and that they remain effective, operational, and we discharge our statutory duties. So taking account all of the feedback that we've heard.
Very much. Okay, scrutiny comments. So the environment, economy, scrutiny, discuss this, Councillor Carrington. So would you like to summarise?
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Good morning, Leader. Good morning, colleagues. Apologies in advance for my voice. As you know, I'm just coming back from 3 weeks without it. We did discuss this in detail. I just cover the heads of terms, really. We covered in some detail contract structure, the flexibility. We were satisfied with that. We discussed in detail the pricing and payment mechanism. It is likely that we had good value. We also discussed, and members will remember this, it was topical at the time. There had been a BBC report which described waste incineration, as it calls it, as the UK's dirtiest form of power. That was also discussed by the committee in the context of this report, and the committee gave considerable concern that what that report had not done, excuse me, was to look at the alternatives, which are basically landfill. The committee noted that it was very proud of our performance as a council in having one of the lowest landfill rates in the country. The alternative to that would be stopping incineration. We also covered future legislation. This is not a static backdrop. There are significant changes going on with this council. It's very much across, both in terms of food waste, which is coming in fairly shortly, but also let's not forget soft plastics and the whole potential of the paralysing technology, which is being pursued elsewhere. And finally, we looked at the context of challenges in the overall waste hierarchy. There is a national picture which shows that we are not increasing our level of recycling. That's a concern across the country, and I know it's one this council has addressed. I would like, in conclusion, Chairman, just to go back to the point made both by Councillor McNally and by Rachel. That's the business of routing. And I had the opportunity of discussing this with officers while the report before you was in preparation. And I was very pleased, as was the committee, at the response we received. In the committee, I raised from the chair concern about the wording of future contracts and also that their implementation must ensure that heavy goods vehicles associated with the movement of waste in the PFW should follow clear routing plans, and that those routing plans should keep such traffic on A roads wherever possible and would not permit the use of lesser highways. In other words, it would keep such traffic out of our rural villages and off our roads, except, of course, where there are exceptional circumstances, roadworks, flood, weather, whatever it may be. That was considered by the committee essential to minimise the harmful impacts of HGV traffic through the county's villages. We noted the assurances given in the paper and by officers to the committee and stressed the importance of ensuring that every individual contract and also the associated protocols and implementation of those contracts work to keep that traffic on main roads and away from our village communities. I don't want to pick on Councillor McNally, but his wording was slightly looser when he introduced the subject. The committee was very cognizant of what Rachel and her team said in the meeting and the wording in the document. So I would ask the board to note that we approved it on that basis. I would ask the board, in particular, the relevant executive board member, to overlook all of these contracts to make sure that this traffic is kept on A roads where it belongs. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. Yeah, I think there's good work in terms of some common sense in terms of, expecting the contractors to have a reasonable mechanism to avoid going through built-up areas where that is at all possible. So I think that has been taken on board, has it not, Councillor McNally? And it will be part of your oversight of the details, which is part two of the recommendation. Yeah. Thank you. Just to start before questions, the BBC, I have to say, the BBC reputation as being, a fair and a thorough investigation before they make pronouncements isn't helped by this sort of thing, which, as you've quite rightly said, it's all right saying, which it isn't actually the most dirty form, but there's no mention about what else you would do. And when you actually look into the science of this, whatever you do in waste, there will be an impact on the environment, whatever you do. If you anaerobic digest or whatever you do, there will be an impact. And the question then remains, what is the best way of, what's the most efficient way and the most minimal way of damaging the environment at the same time turning the waste into something useful. So I think that was very disappointing. I'm very pleased the scrutiny committee finding the time just to look into that issue. That will, as Andrew has said, there is a potential of a incineration tax, which will, again, is currently on the government's plans. But to me, it's a lazy assumption that, incineration is somehow bad and we must do something else. I just think, well, if you've got to get rid of it, at least try and turn this into something which is, i.e. electricity, which is of use to do that further. So obviously this paper is about the haulage of the waste. So any comments, questions, please? Councillor Davies.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really good paper. I like the proposal. Just a few kind of background questions, really. What is the breakdown of the vast majority of what we're transporting? What kind of material is it? I'd be also keen just to expand a little bit on the. I'm pleased to see mentioned small to medium enterprises getting involved. But I mean, I can't imagine there are many businesses in Lincolnshire that do this kind of work. How big is the market? So they're my two questions.
Thank you. So I'll take the question around the composition. So the composition of the waste, within there, we think there's around, on the last analysis, about 28% of that was food waste that's going into the energy from waste. We similarly have around 15 to 20,000 tonnes a year of soft plastics within that composition. The rest of it is materials such as that we find wood in there, we've got sanitary, we've got nappies, we've got non-recyclable damaged paper and cardboard and that sort of thing. The other part is around understanding the difference between what could have been recycled when it went into the general waste bins at home versus what it looks like by the time we get to test it, because it's very different then to understand whether or not it's been contaminated. There's a lot of work afoot in terms of preparation for simpler recycling and pulling out the food waste around engagement and communications to maximise the amount of food waste that we can take out, which will go into anaerobic digestion. We're also working with partners and some of the industry. We're indeed talking to university as well about what can be done within the sector to enhance the recycling of soft plastics as well, because we all know that there's a vast amount of that and there isn't really a market to do anything with it at the moment. So that is something we see an awful lot of within there. So what we're doing is monitoring that composition and also being mindful of the future developments around the ETS and the fossil derived materials that are going in there, so that we can target our activities around waste minimisation and waste diversion on those types of materials that cause the issues within there and do all that we can to reduce them.
That's a lot of food waste.
It's an awful lot of food waste, an awful lot of food waste. On average, about 1.5 kilos per week per household nationally. When you actually start to look at what that looks like, it's quite startling. So we're doing some work at the moment to understand what that looks like, what different demographics throw out, so that we can not just take the government's, the DEFRA communications campaign, but that we can be very mindful of what that means to residents of Lincolnshire and understanding the difference there. And there is a vast difference between urban and rural settlements and what people throw away. So we're doing some quite bespoke work on a project at the moment to tackle that.
Just to add on that as well, it's also including POPs waste, which is persistent organic pollutant. So sofas have been classed as this waste stream now, so we have to handle that separately at our transfer station. So that'll be something that this contract will also take. And it's also the bulky waste as well that's brought in from the HWRCs and our district partners. So beds and bed frames and stuff like that. So that'll be included within this contract.
And in terms of the market, we did pre-market engagement and received 7 responses from suppliers. The issue mainly is around vehicles, the type of vehicles that we use, and the rural nature of Lincolnshire. The procurement is currently live, and we've had 4 expressions of interest so far. So we're expecting around about 4 to 5 bids for this contract.
In terms of changes to legislation, obviously because it's done on a by load basis, so that the option will vary. So can you just with the new legislation and indeed rollout of the paper and card, which is what obviously we are doing, just some talk your take on what difference in terms of residual waste how the paper and card has made to those areas which are doing it, but also what future plans will have an impact on this transporting of residual waste.
So obviously, where we've worked with our district partners to take the paper and card and separate that, we've also done a lot of work to clean up the rest of the mixed dry recycling, of which there was a significant amount of contamination. So in terms of tonnage, that's almost equaled itself out in the initial parts of the rollout. What we're seeing now is there is still paper and card going through the energy from waste from the districts that haven't rolled into the project, but also where it is not quality material for recycling. So that will have an impact going forward. In terms of the food waste and the impacts on that, we're working very hard with FCC around understanding the balances on the calorific value and the impact that will have. If we simply take food out, what we don't have is just that amount. If we've taken 20,000 tonnes out, we've got 20,000 tonnes worth of capacity because the burn rate is very different. So there's a calculation, and we have a group that we're working with them at the moment to understand what that will look like. Taking some of the soft plastics out will start to mitigate and create that capacity as well. So it's very hard to say we take X amount of tonnage out of residual waste into a separate waste stream and create capacity, because the calorific value doesn't reflect simply tonnages. So we're having to work quite hard on, it's almost like a recipe, and understanding, if you take out one element, you can't just replace it with something else and expect the same.
Are you saying that residual plastic has a low calorific value? I mean, I thought it would help.
The plastic has a high.
Yeah.
That burns fast. The food waste has a low. So that burns slower.
So they balance each other out.
Yes, it balances each other out. So
So, you know.
when we take food waste out, we'll have that initial, the burn rate will be slower, but then when we take the plastic out, it will then.
So if you take plastic out which has no value, then I know we try to be as careful as we can. You end up with plastic mountains in East Asia because nobody wants it.
But yes,
At this
and
point.
Common sense would imply, well, if that's the case, we're better off burning it, at least turning it into something which is useful.
so yeah, I mean, we're working with our suppliers at the minute to understand what this future legislation change will look like, how it would work practically, how it would work in our facilities, and how that could be.
I mean, obviously, there's lots of discovery, like you say. In terms of rejected recyclates, presumably that's part of this contract. Is it?
Anything that's rejected at curbside is,
Rejected at the where the recycling centre.
no, they deal with that themselves. So anything, the contamination through the recycling contractors, they deal with themselves, and they do treat that in the same way. They'll send those rejections off for their through their own through incineration.
Well, it's what they're expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Further comments then, please, Jamie? Good. So the recommendations are there on page 11. We basically, we approve the procurement process with the approximate value as is stated, and we delegate the details to the executive director in consultation with councillor. All those in favour, please indicate. Very good. That is agreed. Thank you very much. Move on to item 6 next then, please, which is trees and woodland management strategy, very important. Part of our heritage and natural environment in Lincolnshire. So, Councillor Davies not here, so we move on straight on to Chris, and Andy's not here, and he's got his target of getting all these trees that we promised. So, Chris, so straight over to you.
Thank you, Leader. So yes, as Lee's just mentioned there, we do have a target and an ambition as part of our wider delivery of the Green Metal Plan.
Target, not ambition, target.
But yes, right, to plant or facilitate the planting of 750,000 trees. That's approximately 1 per resident of the county. Initially, there was slow progress from when we started this, but following a successful bid into the Woodland Creation Accelerator Fund, we've been able to make 2 funded appointments to secure further resources to aid in achieving those targets. As consequence of that, we've created a 10-year strategy, so looking up to 2034, show how we will be seeking to achieve the target and how we will work with and support various partners. As part of all this work, obviously, we're contributing to habitat creation, as well as alongside our net zero greenhouse gas emissions target to 2050, as well as improved air and water quality for the county. And the basic mantra of the strategy is to choose the right tree in the right place for the right reasons, bearing in mind all the variables that we need to consider, such as soil type, water availability, the historic environment, the landscape character, biodiversity, resistance to climate changes. So all these things have to go in the mix when we choose what trees need to go where. So Lincolnshire itself has just 4% tree cover. That's against a comparison to the national average of about 13%. That's predominantly due to the historic nature of the county and the agricultural influences over many centuries, but also due to our landscape characteristics such as peat fenland being drained, or Lincolnshire wolds, and the county has lost a significant proportion of hedgerows as well over that time, and they're also important for connecting wooded areas and making corridors for wildlife and for biodiversity. We've also seen a decrease in orchards across the county due to changed agricultural practices and the intensification of arable land. The strategy intends to try and reverse some of that decline, and we'll be targeting areas and approaches that bring the broadest range of public benefits. The key objectives you'll see on page 36 of the report pack, but very briefly, to promote the benefit of planting in suitable trees, orchards, hedgerows and woodlands, to develop new and facilitate access to existing grant funding for tree planting, working in partnership with district, parish councils, government departments, charities, farmers, landowners, and so on, and all our communities, to aid in offering expert advice and to promote and support development of woodland management plans to ensure that they remain sustainable and provide those multifunctional benefits. Finally, to aid in that delivery of the biodiversity net gain schemes with guidance from our emerging local nature recovery strategy, which will come before the executive in the next year. So to deliver these projects, we've initiated a project called Linkwoods, which was launched by the leader at the Bowthorpe Oak in July. And that in itself has a target of 200,000 trees to be planted by 2026 across both town and rural areas. And that's the equivalent of 60 football fields and 20,000 metres of new hedging, so not an inconsiderable amount. To do so, we're looking at a twin-streamed approach. So evaluating the potential for trees planting across our own property estate, including county farmland where practical, but also our environment sites, office and business sites, schools, land held by highways that don't form carriageways, and similarly where we can influence through planting into through the planning process, biodiversity net gain requirements that indicate tree planting as a viable opportunity. The second stream is forming partnerships with others, including local authorities, the parish councils, Forest Commission, Natural England, Woodland Trust, the Wildlife Trust, and so on, Greater Lincolnshire Nature Partnership. And we'll seek to subsidise native planting schemes working with parishes, voluntary groups and private landowners. One such initiative we've already had, which you've possibly seen through our comms, is the free tree and hedging giveaway, which is to coincide with National Tree Week in starting November 23rd. Generated a lot of interest. In fact, they've all gone already, and they were due at locations at Boothby Pagnell and Market Raisin. And yes, as I said, they've all already been allocated, so it's been tremendously successful and something we would hopefully look to run again if we can secure the funding to do so, which would be great. We'll also, through colleagues, provide that wider advice and guidance to those looking at undertaking woodland creation management, particularly when we start looking at the environmental land management schemes as they come forward for the landowner community and farmers. On the orchard side of things, we secured a separate funding stream, and that will help create 30 community orchards across the county. Again, some small numbers, but it's a step in the right direction. Hopefully we can build on that and can generate some interest on that. And that's the commemorative piece for the coronation of King Charles. And then finally, amongst the Linkwoods programme, we partnered up with the Woodland Trust, and we're going to be acting as agents as part of their More Woods and More Hedges grant scheme. So again, we'll be looking, working with them and the work that they do on the tree planting and woodland creation side of things. That covers the strategy element and the scheme that we've got going. The second part of the paper in Appendix B, just for completeness as much as anything, is just to recognise the work we do on our existing tree estate and asset. How we work with our highways colleagues and the asset management of those to make sure we keep the public safe. So it's really just a run through the on that side of things for completeness. And I'll take a pause there, Leader.
Thank you. Obviously went to environment and economy, Councillor Carrington.
Yes, it did. And I'll start at the end, if you will, Leader, because members were very, very strongly supportive of this. And their words were pretty well your words, that this is an enormously important thing that we're doing. We covered, and again, I'm just going to summarise the heads of terms rather than go through all the detail. But the committee looked at a number of aspects, including the importance of tree selection, getting the right tree in the right place, as Chris has said, and also accounting for climate resilience, because the environment for a tree in 50 years' time, when it is mature, is going to be very different to the one we have now. We looked at the issue of the financial cost and also the maintenance of trees. Trees do need maintenance, and that then is also important that the correct species is selected to minimise long-term maintenance requirements. Access to woodland and infrastructure for planting. The issue of land and access to private land is obviously a very important one. We do not have a limitless supply of land on which to plant trees, as is the issue of partnership, working and collaboration. As Chris has said, we cannot as a council do this on our own. We have to work with others, and the committee were very pleased at the very positive way in which we were working on the one hand with national bodies like Woodland Trust, but also I've got personal experience of this in my own division with individual parishes in a very positive and fruitful way. And finally, we looked at the issue of the utilisation of land and indeed the acquisition of land, because it takes a lot of land to facilitate planting 750,000 trees. And in this, we did explore the options presented by Biodiversity Net Gain in the planning world. That, of course, is being administered by our district council colleagues in their role as local planning authorities. So this council, members of the committee noted, has an overarching responsibility in terms of the nature recovery strategy, which ties in to the whole issue of the NG. So we have a great opportunity, as it felt, to play a positive role. But again, this goes back to the issues of collaboration. So in summary, Leader, we were very, very supportive of this, and we asked for an update in a year's time. Happy to take it.
Thank you very much. Yes, I mean, obviously, as mentioned, we had a really good winter season for both oak, which is an ancient oak tree, and obviously, again, working with partnership. Did you want to just say a bit more how, because what I learned was a lot of advice given to landowners or anybody really as to how they can get help with planting trees, because the trees themselves aren't expensive, but it's more about the appropriate siting and the appropriate type of tree. Can you just expand a bit on what advice support people can get out there to if they want to plant trees?
Absolutely, and that's where my colleague unfortunately had a real struggle getting in. She would be able to answer this probably more eloquently than I. But she and her colleagues, provide that advice to landowners about how best to maintain it, where best to locate them. They'll help with potentially a site visit if they can pick up particular spots that might not help. We look at around about 10% loss. So it's trying to minimise that. Again, coming back to that mantra of the right tree in the right place for the right reason. To keep working towards that. And it's making sure we can put people in touch with organisations that can help facilitate the purchase of trees as well. We're working with the Trust, working with Forestry Commission, and how best to maintain them so that we do minimise that loss amount.
Yeah, absolutely. And protection of deer, certainly my part of Lincolnshire, are a major problem. Obviously, our experts at taking the tops off trees with things.
So part of what we will do in support when we're providing trees is provide those protective stakes as well. So again, trying to minimise that loss at all times. There's an inevitability to a degree, but if we get it right, we can minimise it.
I mean, obviously, you talked about trees aren't, well, I suppose the first thing is obviously maintaining our own stock of trees. So I always think of that when I come up here. I go on the Sleaford bypass. And I think it's fair to say there are trees, but I have to say whether not much has been done, shall I put it like that? So there is a challenge for us to, I mean, many years ago, probably 30 years ago, we had a big tree planting exercise on the verges, didn't we? But they're all getting to the stage now where something can be done, and it probably is quite. So just your thoughts on that, how we can, for example, I come back to Sleaford bypass. Well, really it needs thinning out and all sorts properly, but we don't seem to have the resources to do it.
Yeah, there is an element of trying to strike that balance between resource availability and works we can undertake. We do employ a consultancy that look after our principal route networks, make sure things are safe, paramount element of looking at that and advising landowners where we feel perhaps one of their trees, if it's in the hedge just behind, is going to cause a problem potentially for the use of the carriageway and footways. But yes, we probably do need to look a bit more wider now and start looking at those schemes that were 30 years ago, because they will be coming into those periods where they need thinning out to make them survive better and get the best.
Yeah, and it will help, because if they're, what I know about, if you have too many trees, you end up with them falling over because they're all weak.
Yeah,
Which brings us to the highways issue, because it's a bit of a challenge there in terms of trees are great and they're lovely on the roadside, but not if they fall over and cause problems. So I don't know what the policy is in terms of trees on that.
Yeah, I mean, we inspect them all, I think on principal road network, I think it's annually. We don't have any massive issues as such. Residents are really good at getting in touch with particular locations. And, my area, for example, Clarabee Road in Grantham, some people will be aware of, is a lovely tree-lined road, but occasionally we do have to go out and do works. I think what I'm particularly pleased to see in this, and I think it's brilliant, is particularly potentially as part of the new design guide that the development management team are working on, is actually more trees on the street, but they need to be the right kind. Particularly some of the work, for example, on Dixon Street in Lincoln, where we've put in root locks. They've been brilliant, and they make such a difference to the way streets are. And the evidence now is undeniable. For example, looking at Derek from a public health perspective, that trees on the streets make people feel better. They improve the look of an area, the better for air pollution. There's so much more I think we could be doing. But yeah, they are an issue. But I think they're an issue. Perhaps Sleaford bypass is a good example where, for the best of reasons, perhaps historically we haven't necessarily, to quote Chris, put the right trees in the right place. I think if you do it correctly, it can make a real difference. And I noticed when travelling around, the difference between kind of old style like forestry commission, say Stapleford Wood, where you've got monoculture, and then you go to places like London, Thorpe and Boston, where you've got these new woods that have been planted. The difference is unbelievable. And of course, what you see is people using them a lot more. And I think that's incredible, the amount of people want to get out into the countryside. And woods just seem to attract people, don't they? I don't know quite why it is, but there's definitely a real connection we have. So I think we can do more on this. I'm really pleased by it. Really pleased.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Corey, then Councillor.
Thank you. Welcome this paper. I think it's a great development for County Council to lead on. I know from the paper that we're working with 49 partner organisations.
Yeah, there's quite an extensive set.
I mean that's
the normal effect, but yeah,
that's huge. Alarming to learn from you that only 4% of Lincolnshire has tree cover, but you did explain why. So when we've planted 750,000 trees and we've accounted for around 10% loss, what will that do to our percentage tree cover?
obviously don't know that figure. I mean, in terms of,
No, it's an ongoing.
Yeah.
thing.
It would still probably be lower than the national average, but we've got to bear in mind that for Lincolnshire, we're not a treed county historically. So do we want to go as far as changing the nature of the county's environment to beyond what we would hope to expect? So we think 750,000 is actually a pretty good number in terms of progressing that. And we'll evaluate it as we go along. Obviously, it's quite a way off getting to that target, admittedly. We're making much bigger strides than we have ever done before.
Something that does, before I come onto that, I just want to echo Councillor Davies' point. When you've got a street scene with trees in it, not only do you feel better, but it the tree cover lowers the temperature. So in a world where we've got rising temperatures, those cities, Sheffield not among them, rather controversially, you lower the street temperature and it's much more comfortable for everybody. But you said right tree, right place for the right reason. An increasing feature of life in Lincolnshire is flooding. So are we going to plant trees or significant numbers of trees in places where it could actually mitigate flooding?
So that's the sort of thing we are looking at. We do that already partly through our natural flood management scheme. So think about the Chalk Streams project with Wolds and affecting those upper catchments before the water gets down into the towns as it flows through towards the Widden and the coast and so on. So yeah, we're looking at that, almost attenuation of the water, utilising trees, leaky dams and things like that. But yeah, that tree stock is part of that process.
Thank you. And I know much of the flooding that happens in Lincolnshire, actually the water doesn't start in Lincolnshire, it's somewhere else. So we would look to partner counties to do similar. Thank you very much. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. I've got a list, but one of those questions was going to be around the Boothby Pagnell and the Market Raisin drop-offs. But you did say, didn't you, that all of those trees that are going to be available are spoken for already? Right, okay. So don't want people turning up. Is the same going to apply as far as the orchard trees are concerned? Because I think it's a little later in December, isn't it, before they go out wherever? Are they being collected, or do you still have vacancies as far as?
I do believe so. Hattie would have the detail.
Okay.
So I'll make sure that I get something back to you after this meeting when I catch up with her when she's able to get it. But yes, as far as I'm aware, there is still work to do. And again, it's if there are more people wanting to do it, it's a program we can look to expand, I'm sure.
Yep. Okay. And then going back to the personal level, I noticed about the asset management and the GIS, etc. And often it's the case of, is it the landowner's tree or is it the highway's responsibility? And had a little look at the map. It's quite interesting, but is it possible to actually divide it up into divisions for members, or is that a little bit difficult? Because for me to be able to say at a local level, that's something for highways or that's something for the landowner, assuming they're different.
Yeah, it can be difficult, obviously, when you're looking at the exact location of a tree, whether being able to map that with sufficient accuracy could be a problem. We would always probably advise speaking with the local highways officer, who will speak with the arboricultural officer if needs be. The general rule of thumb is if it's in the hedge, it's the landowner, or if it's obviously behind the hedge, it's the landowner. Anything that's on the carriageway side of the hedge, it would be for the county council to look after and look, and maintain if necessary, or remove.
Sure, that's correct. I don't think that's correct.
Even self.
I think highways law is that highways can do what they want on the verge, but then if something else needs doing, it becomes the landowner's responsibility. I may be wrong, but I think I'm not sure I agree.
So as the rule of thumb is that it's in the hedge, it's the landowner. If it's on our side, even if it's self-set, so if something that's come out of the landowner's tree and is like a sycamore seed or something, that would still be for us to have to look after it. It's within the highway limit.
I think we have powers over 25 metres, don't we?
I'm not entirely.
Yeah, the only reason I say it is that this comes up a lot. And I have the joyful job of telling landowners that, it's not highways tree, it's your tree, which does not go down very well.
Yes, I think that's my point.
More often than not, the landowners.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, we might be wrong.
I'll give it a double check.
If I'm wrong, please let me know, and then I can.
Please let us all know.
I can bring more joy to you.
But equally, I'll fall on my sword if landowners do it.
Obviously, Andy, your boss, assures me we're on target with our getting the 750,000 trees.
We're certain.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's what he's telling me.
Yes.
Unless you want to contradict your
I
boss.
wouldn't possibly.
That's good to know. I mean, in terms of biodiversity, there is, landowners also, obviously, poorer quality land probably will then become a trees or PNG will become an attractive, including for us. I mean, in turn, and you also mentioned about percentage-wise, we have a low coverage, but that's not all of them. Chesterford, for example, from memory, Chesterford means something to do with trees. So in my part of the world, there are lots of trees because there's lots of clay land and land which isn't the best for agriculture. So I don't think anyone is suggesting we start putting trees on high quality land, but there is other parts. I think we just need to be sensible.
Again, it's that right tree, right place.
Yeah.
So again, I said we're not naturally a tree county. So if you look at the Fenland area, there's very few trees. So we wouldn't be looking at creating new forests in the Fenland. We're just looking conglomerates. So it is matching the location, the natural characteristics of the environment landscape.
Good. Any further questions, comments, please? Okay. Recommendations are there on page 19, which is we approve the strategy and we note the progress. Progress which will come back to your committee, Councillor Carrington, in terms of reviewing progress. All those in favour, please show. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Thank you. So then we move on to the final paper. Thank you for that. Three people, so which is housing related support recommissioning, Councillor Bogut.
Yeah.
Let the have what's replaced the trees.
Right, this is the housing related support service extension, and we're asking the executive today for a 12-month extension for this contract. It was last commissioned in 2020, and we would like the extension so that we can review the contract as we do with all contracts when they come up, to make sure that we're getting value for money. The service, for those who don't know it, it's a short-term support service for vulnerable adults with substance misuse or mental health concerns, mainly, who are either homeless or threatening with homelessness, to help them deal with the issues which have led them really to where they are now. So I'll pass over.
I'll say just a couple of words and then so I think this is one of those services where it's been going for some time. We're seeing a lot of demand for the service. It's clearly valued by the people who receive the service, but it's quite a challenge for us to say precisely what the beneficial impact is. So the people who receive it clearly value it, but if we're asked to look at exactly what impact does it have, so what's the impact on other services as a result, it's quite tricky to do. That's one of the major reasons asking for the additional years, to give us that opportunity to really focus on, so what does this do? So people value the service, but does it mean that they then have less demand for mental health services? Does it mean that they're able to maintain tenancies and settle down? What are the consequences? And one of the issues we're looking at there is, so we think there's a benefit. Where does that benefit fall? Does it fall primarily to this housing authority because people are able to maintain their tenancies? Does it fall primarily to the NHS because people are able to maintain a steadier lifestyle and therefore don't fall into mental health crisis? Does it fall to the local authority because people don't have need for adult social care? So we're trying to work out what the benefit is, what the impact on services, and where that benefit falls. And that this additional year would give us the opportunity to be really rigorous in understanding the impact, seeing where that benefit falls, and therefore considering if the service should continue in the longer term. Actually, the logic would be that the services, the organisations that benefit from that service could be the ones that fund it. At the moment, we haven't got the robust evidence to allow us to make that clarity. So it's really to give us that the year would give us the opportunities to be able to be absolutely clear what the benefit is, who gains, where that benefit falls, and to have any appropriate conversations with those organisations for the long term. So on all of your
there's a couple of things, if I might add to that. So just to in terms of how the service is delivered, it's floating support and accommodation based. The accommodation based element, those costs are not part of the contract. The contract covers purely the support. So the accommodation itself is funded through housing benefit. There's no statutory duty on the council to provide this sort of service. However, it does support our discharge under the Care Act to provide services that help people prevent developing needs for care and support in the future. And I think the only other thing really to add to that is that in addition to work to further understand the local picture, we're also awaiting some more information on the government's overarching strategy for homelessness and funding allocations in that area. So once we have that, that will enable us to have some more clarity in relation to that. And as Martin has said, really the time now to understand where the financial balance lies with this. The national and the local data indicates the system costs of homelessness are most strongly experienced elsewhere. So we need to take the opportunity to work with those partners to better understand that. If I may, I'll just ask Carl to cover the commercial aspects.
Certainly, yes. So first of all, in the context of the procurement and legal implications, the contract regulations do permit the extension of contracts by direct award without needing to undertake a competitive process where certain criteria are met. And in this case, the circumstances are considered to meet the relevant criteria for it to be a non-substantial modification, and it therefore be permissible under the regulations. So if supported, the recommendation would represent a low risk in procurement terms. Secondly, in relation to the extension process itself, we have entered discussions with the current provider who had already indicated that the current budget is insufficient to support continued delivery of the current model, primarily due to inflationary pressures and predominantly wage inflation. So it will be necessary to make some adjustments to the scope of the service to sustain service delivery within a £2.2 million budget for the remainder of the current contract term and the extension period. The provider has confirmed its willingness to extend the contract should we confirm we wish to do so, and subject to the agreement of suitable adjustments to enable continued delivery within the contract price. They have also confirmed their commitment to work with us to finalise the scope of any adjustments as quickly as possible, with the aim of maintaining maximum service impact through the remainder of the current contract year and the extension period. We're in the process of working through preliminary proposals with them, so discussions are ongoing, with the preferred approach being to focus any necessary adjustments on revisions to service volume expectations in order to ensure that the nature of service delivery and therefore the impacts and the benefits for service recipients and indeed commissioners remain consistent with the original purpose, the intent and outcomes of the contract, and that will in turn then support the work that's needed during the next 12 months to more fully quantify and qualify the benefits and impacts of the service to inform decisions about future funding and commissioning of the services at the end of 2025.
Carl? What's your internal scrutiny of last week? So would you like to summarise what they said? You weren't able to be there, but I'm sure you've had a report.
Yeah. No, I was away, unfortunately, on the day, which was the 16th of October 2024. The Adults and Community Wellbeing Scrutiny Committee agreed to put forward an alternative recommendation, one to the executive as follows: that the extension of the housing and related support service contract be approved for a period of 12 months from the 1st of October 2025 to the 30th of September 2026 at a value of £2,725,000. having gone through and read the paper, I think the paper actually summarises up really well what this sort of council is about. It's commissioned a service. We're looking at a 1-year extension to sort of, in effect, deep dive to make sure that actually it's aligned with what the service users need. It also is looking at the further field of looking at working closely with district councils and the NHS, who also have a role to play in this. It is a preventative service, and I think that the 1-year extension on the contract is an absolute ideal situation to ensure that this service is fit for the future. And I can't say anything more. I think it's very good paper, and
I mean, it just seemed pretty straightforward. I mean, obviously, as an extension, just think as been said, not just to look at, you know, relationship with partners, but also to see what legislation appears, obviously within the year. So it would, although we wouldn't normally extend an extra year, but I think in the circumstances, the pragmatic thing to do. And I'm pleased to hear that you've been able to have a sensible conversation with the provider and give them extra resource. I think public health is also helping out in some way as well to make sure that they can continue to deliver the service for the next year or so. And then obviously we'll look at see what comes out in terms of the big budget, shall we say, the council budget, and decisions we will have to make during that. So it would seem a pretty straightforward and sensible thing to do. Any comments? Yes, Councillor Davies.
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with that, Leader. It's like Anne-Marie and I have had some conversations about some local issues, and it's incredibly complicated. And I think the relationships between various organisations need to be considered very closely. And if it's now would seem to me like a really good opportunity to review all of that, let's not rush into doing anything, but take time to see how everything sits together, particularly around legislative changes. The one thing I think I am certain is it's a really important service because we are dealing with arguably the most vulnerable group of our society. And it's something that, you know, and I'll be candid, if you're not aware that it's happening and that people are going through these problems, if you're not seeing it, you don't realise it's there. But there's a whole world, dare I say, going on around people who are struggling in the most interminable of situations. And it's really good that we are doing something to help them. And hopefully we can continue to do that in the future. But it's about how it fits and what the shape of that moving forward. So very happy to support the paper, Luke.
Thank you. Any further comments? So recommendations there on page 78, which we approve this extension value of 2.2 million. We delegate the details to the director in consultation. Well, fairly Holder. All those in favour, please show. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. So with that, I will close the meeting. Just before you finish, I did forget that I was thinking in terms of talk about overall budget, that obviously in terms of, you said there's I'll go back to the trees now, there is obviously more demand than supply of trees. So I think it's something that's, I will finish the meeting now. So is there time to do another round of trees, what have you, if you're given the resources to do so?
Yes, it's within the tree planting